May I invite Akshay Tyagi, Head for Diversity, Equity and Inclusion at the Lalit Suri Hospitality Group, to take this forward.
Namaskar everyone, and thank you for being such an amazing audience. And I would like to actually start saying that the state of DEI as strategy to organizations is exactly like this room. We start with so much of passion, so many of enthusiastic listeners, but it really don't flow down that way. And this is what it looks like. And this is how I give it up to all of you sitting here in this audience, because you are the ones who are actively listening and are also passionate to drive it that way in your respective organizations. So thanks to leaders like you. Moving on, I think DEI as a strategy to organizations is really, really something that should not be actually looked at as strategy, because humanity doesn't have a strategy. We learn as we grow in our careers, we learn how we grow with our experiences, and most often times when we look at DEI, we think of CSR as an important element to it, because that helps you deep dive into the communities who you are wanting to reach out to or you connect with. But how are we doing it is the question. We discuss about women, but is it something that we are just discussing? It's been something that we have discussing since the time we were born. But have we reached to a point where we see women progressing that way? And there comes the question of privilege, right? People who have that privilege are able to translate into something else, but there are still women hustling, there are still women discussing, there are still girls committing suicide at the time of their first menstruation cycle. And there is so much more. Similarly, we are discussing about sex, gender, and sexual orientations. But are we communicating it to the right people? Wherein we want to create an ecosystem where everybody is sensitive, we are reminding LGBTQI people that you are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender persons. Instead of telling it to people who are in leadership positions, instead of communicating it to people who are part of your team, that here are we as an organization who are wanting to be inclusive, and not exclusively inclusive to certain communities, but an inclusively inclusive organization to everybody, wherein intersections play a very important role. And this is how you foster diversity, equity, and inclusion, because diversity, like they mentioned, that it's a fact, it's given. How many of you had seen yourself in the mirror? Everybody? How many of you noticed that your one eye is comparatively smaller than the other, your finger of one hand are different in the other one? How many of you noticed that? Many of you, and if you haven't, please do it now, because this is how diverse we are in our own existence, and we are talking about differences that we see outside. So it's an important learning for each one of us to understand how diverse we are in our own existence, and we are not asking our one eye to remain shut the entire life because they're smaller. Or we are not asking our one hand to just not do anything because they are not as privileged as the other one, right? So if we can actually conversate that way and we can make people realize and recognize the differences, then only we will move to the further stage of understanding these differences well. The problem is that we are not recognizing what exactly is happening outside. We are discussing, again, in a privileged setup, but we are still not discussing what it takes to come to this platform. Are we accessible enough to reach to this hall? Is there a gender-inclusive washroom for a transgender person to be in this hall throughout the day? Are we really thinking or having a sign language interpreter for somebody speech and disabled to be in this room and understand everything that we discussed since the beginning of this day? Are we still making sure that somebody who is an autistic person or somebody with learning disability also has a buddy right in here in this ecosystem to think about all of this? And then we are discussing about fostering inclusion. So it's a game. Once you start to understand, then you come to the point wherein you accept. And most of us don't know what to accept, how to create that belongingness, how to reach out to people down the line to understand and collaborate, to know their lives, know their challenges, to understand what as an organization you have to do to not just bring them to the workplace for sake of celebrating specific days, but also creating a roadmap to bring them at your workplace to work, to find opportunities. Like I come from an organization wherein our chairperson and managing director is a woman. 2 out of 3 executive directors are women, and then 1 gay man as an executive director. It is amazing for me as an individual because in last 4.5 years, I have seen myself growing in the system because I have the support. I have mentorship from people like them who are not judging me by my age or by thinking that, oh, it will be too fancy for people to relate to this story, but are really recognizing and acknowledging the hard work that I put into in not just strategizing for the company, but also ensuring collaborative support to the organizations who we really believe in, who we really want to work with. And this is how we all should, in our organization, should look at it. We need to understand that there are communities who we are really wanting to work with have a history of years. So it is not going to be that easy to bring everybody at the workplace. You need to build trust. You need to ensure that people who you are reaching out to also believe in the mission that you are wanting to. For example, a lot of us been wanting to work with transgender persons in our respective organizations. Most of us have been saying that we really want to, but we are not finding somebody good enough to be part of our family or as an organization and so much more. I have a very simple question. You have a relative who you have been in touch with since long, and then one fine day you actually stopped conversating with them. You're meeting after 10 years. Is it easy to just go and start conversating and by your all biases? Don't it takes time? It takes. It really won't. And oftentimes we look at people who are actually good friends with you and are also speaking to them so that you build that connection and then you root your conversation that way. It's the same way with the communities that we are working with. It's always not easy and it always is not going to be that fluent for us to go and just start having conversations. Because people will always come back and ask you, where were you all these years when we have been neglected? Where we were actually pulled out of the ecosystem, and it is happening even recently. Like I was just looking at Twitter 2 days back, and I saw a story wherein in Delhi, transgender people were actually asked not to be on roads because they don't want to show it as the G20 policy, and transgenders begging on the street. So you need to understand that there is so much more happening down the ground people are facing in their lives, and this is the case with pretty much each one of us. So how are we fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion? And our believing in it is very important for us to actually work there. So you need to build empathy, which will, of course, build only after you collaborate, you understand from your organizations. You think of it as not just business case, but as humanity case, because you all have to exist together, right? You cannot work in isolation. You cannot work in a way that, okay, I am doing some favor for communities who have been down the line ostracized or being neglected for years, but you have to be somebody who work with the communities. And working for and working with has a lot of difference, because when you work for somebody, there can never be belongingness. And when you work with people, there is always belongingness, there is always connectivity, and there is always relativity in our stories. And that's how I'm sure so many of you must have reflected back in your lives when we heard so many of stories, right? And so many of amazing speakers have shared their narratives. But again, it's very, very important to recognize our privilege. It is very, very important for us to understand what exactly are we wanting to communicate when we are claiming spaces on forums like this. Are we ensuring that people on the other side are feeling represented enough? Are we ensuring that people on the other side of the table are feeling themselves in the story that I am sharing? Are we really making that cut of making them feel worthy enough to be here so that they have some learnings? Are they going back with some strategy or some operational activity for their respective organizations? Because of course, even attending this conference is sort of an ROI that your organization are going to ask, what did you do there? Was it a holiday? So we really need to look at it from that perspective, and that's the only way to foster it. We need to understand the diversity, the differences, which are not going to change, which are here to stay, and which instead of calling out, should be rather celebrated every now and then, because this is going to be long lasting and this has to be here everywhere. So if that's going to be a story, then how are we ensuring that there is equity in place beyond equality? Oftentimes we have been celebrating our individuality in the world of equality, which is realistically not possible. Are we really thinking of each other being in the similar sort of a house with all sort of similar facilities? No. Same sort of education background? No, never. So if that is not a possibility, then how are we thinking that equality will change the world? So we really need to think of equity from that perspective, that we get everybody together, bring them to the table, and like somebody mentioned, that it's like dancing together. So creating that space to come here as well, dancing together as well, but beyond dancing also having that sort of a connect. Because whilst I can individually dance, ensuring that everybody dances the same way that I do and we enjoy our differences and celebrate our lives that way is even more important. And going back home with so many of the stories like each one of us is something that I will always aspire to take back after coming to conferences or seminars like this. So that is how we have to actually take it further.